for multiple persons.
Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Surovell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the bill pass and speaking to the bill.
Senator's the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, this bill is a bill you all saw last year that we passed. It's a bill that authorizes or directs the Supreme Court to develop rules to authorize class action lawsuits in Virginia. It's not effective until July 1, 2022, and it requires them to set up the rules this fall. Virginia is one of only 2 states in America that doesn't allow this remedy in its courts. It's us and Mississippi. So obviously, we are an outlier in America. The federal system has done this for decades. Most other states allow it at the state level. By not having this remedy on our books as ability to resolve litigation, it requires often zillions and zillions of cases to be filed at once, clogging our courts. To give you an example, because the Volkswagen Audi corporation subsidiary, whatever, is headquartered in Herndon, Virginia. There were over 400 lawsuits filed in Fairfax County Circuit Court because of the Volkswagen emissions problem. For those of you from Hampton Roads, you might remember about Chinese drywall. Same thing happened there. If you have a class action remedy, you can have one person appointed to resolve the whole thing. It can be resolved collectively, efficiently. It minimizes the amount of time the courts have to spend on these things, et cetera. It also levels the playing field for folks. For example, if you think about landlord-tenant situations, if you think about other folks dealing with, for example, predatory lenders, other large corporations that break the law multiple times in small dollar amounts, this helps to give people access to justice. At least in my experience also, I found many businesses actually prefer to resolve matters on a class basis because it allows them to adjust their risk evolving out of a situation on a collective basis and resolve everything at once instead of having to deal with everything on a piecemeal fashion. So, Mr. President, I think it's time that we got our legal system up to par with the rest of the country. I would hope we could pass this bill again and get it on to the House. Happy to answer any questions if anybody has them.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain, rise?
Mr. President, I rise to speak to the bill.
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, it seems I've agreed about half the time with my friend from Southern Fairfax on civil justice bills this year. This is one where I think I part company with him. You know, the fact that Virginia does it different is not necessarily such a bad thing. I think many people would argue that we're doing it right and that everybody else is doing it wrong. We do a pretty doggone good job of getting cases through from beginning to end and doing it in a pretty efficient way. And this year, we're frankly doing a lot to turn upside down our criminal and civil justice system and putting a lot of burden on our courts and introducing a lot of concepts that the Virginia courts are not really well equipped to deal with. And this is one of them. You know, we've created are seemingly about to create an automatic right of appeal to the Court of Appeals for every civil and criminal case in Virginia, which is going to extend the period of time between beginning and end of litigation, probably by another year. We are raising the jurisdictional limits for General District Court, which may very well also extend the time for resolution of a case. You know, what we're going to do here is we are piling on not only the courts, but we're also piling on the businesses in Virginia. We have done an awful lot over the course of the past year that has changed the business environment. And, you know, whether it's good or bad is subject to debate. I have a different view from many of my colleagues about whether some of the legislation that we've adopted that's put additional burdens on Virginia business is a good idea or a bad idea. But the fact is that we have put additional burdens on Virginia businesses that have the potential to depress our business ranking in the country. And this is one of the most important issues that helps us support our ranking as one of the best places in America to do business. And the gentleman talks about VW and talks about the drywall cases. Well, let me tell you, there's a big difference between the VW case and the drywall case and what the majority of this bill is going to do. This is not just going to give everybody in this room who owns a Volkswagen the ability to band together and file a class action suit against VW. This is going to give an opportunity to, this band of roving plaintiffs' lawyers, most of whom are from out of state, to get together and file these class action lawsuits, not for an identified group of plaintiffs who own Volkswagens or who have suffered damage from drywall in their house, but it is going to give opportunities to jam up our courts with these coupon cases, these cases that are filed for perceived slights, fractions of pennies for each consumer in Virginia, who are going to have the ability to file class action lawsuits on behalf of these unidentified plaintiffs in these actions. So I would just suggest that while maybe someday we ought to consider looking at class actions, I think it's a bad idea, but I really think it's a bad idea to do this to Virginia businesses and to our court system right now. We're going to talk in probably a couple of days about this automatic right of appeal to the Court of Appeals. You know what? We learned in the Courts Committee that in order to accommodate that, we're going to have to hire 50 new deputy attorney generals in order to be able to handle just the criminal aspect of this. So when you look at the burden that we're adding on the Virginia courts, this is not an insubstantial additional burden. I would ask you to vote no.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from King George, Senator Stewart, rise?
Speak to the bill, Mr. President.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, members, I echo the comments from the gentleman from Rockingham in their entirety, but I think there's one other important point that needs to be mentioned. We are hopefully, to God, coming out of the first pandemic that I've ever been a part of. And I hope that we're going to see the end of this soon, maybe even this year. But our businesses have struggled. I mean, the discussion on Capitol Hill right now is more money, more money, more money to try to keep them afloat. Well, if you enact a provision right now to allow class action suits against Virginia business, it may very well and probably will be the straw that broke the camel's back. So if you like the idea, that's fine. But I don't think now's the right time. And I do, it surprises me how much I agree with the senator from Eastern Fairfax on the majority of these issues, and I generally would not be opposed to this, but I'm opposed to it now because the timing is really bad for what our businesses have gone through and what they may have to continue to go through for the rest of the year. So I'd ask you not to support this bill.
Thank the senator. For what purpose, senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be very brief, and I plan to support this bill. I recognize this idea that COVID has placed a stress on our businesses, and we are going to get bills on that, and we're going to have legislation on that, and that is exactly correct. But I take issue with the fact that somehow having a class action remedy will overstress our courts. Keep in mind that what a class action means is when you have hundreds or even thousands of similarly situated plaintiffs, they can file one consolidated action and have that adjudicated and have that appeal rather than filing 1,000 different actions. We've seen this remedy being used, for example, in the opioid litigation, where you have millions of people that became addicted to opioids. And my law firm has represented 3 of those rural counties. We filed as part of a class action in northeastern Ohio. We couldn't file in Virginia because Virginia doesn't have a class action remedy. This is a way that we could bring together claims of millions of people and get them paid. So in reality, a class action simplifies the system because you get all these claims in front of one judge. And I recognize that this is a stress on business, but to be honest, class action already exists at the federal system. It exists in pretty much every other state. So I don't derogate what is being said, but I do think that this remedy in actuality will make our court system more efficient, not less efficient.
Thank the senator. For what purpose, the senator from Lynchburg, Senator Peake, rise?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
And there's nothing inherently wrong with class actions, but we do have in federal court in Virginia are open to all class actions currently. And almost any class action suit by its very nature is going to be eligible for federal court. But let's think about what we are doing to our court system in this special session of last year and this session. So last session, we are now doing away with jury sentencing in criminal cases. And I know we talked about it briefly, but I don't think many of you have any idea what that is going to do to the caseload for our circuit court judges who will now be doing all of the sentencing in criminal cases brought in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are then going to change the Court of Appeals. Court of Appeals by right, and all of the new cases add 5 judges, a minimum of 55 attorneys for the Attorney General's office. And we're doing General District Court, we're going to double their liability, or double their jurisdiction amount from $25,000 to $50,000. And now we're going to throw in class actions. And so none of these have taken effect. We have had no studies on the caseload. We have not seen how our judges are going to respond. And we have not even considered the fiscal impact these changes are going to have to our court system over the next couple of years. We are making dramatic changes to our court system in the span of 1 year. And it is going to cost a lot, and it's going to put a lot of stress on our judges, and we probably don't have enough, and it's going to be a dramatic impact on our personnel. And we talk about one other thing. Virginia has long been considered one of the best places to be a lawyer. You have people come in from out of state and, oh my goodness, how refreshing it is to be here, where y'all don't fight over this or this or this. And you, even in Northern Virginia, where it is somewhat more stressful than it is in Lynchburg or Harrisonburg or Hanover County or King William. But we're going to bring it open to these late night advertisements that you see every time you watch television for this illness, and this illness. And make no mistake about it, in most of these class action lawsuits, the plaintiffs receive pennies. The lawyers make fortunes, and the plaintiffs receive pennies. That's why they bring class action, because most of the cases are not very valuable. The lawyers get the majority of the money. The people, the harmed people, receive very little. So I would ask you to vote against this bill. Let's take a minute and let's see what happens and reflect. Let's look and see what happens with all the bills we've already passed to the judicial system in the Commonwealth.
Do any senators other than the patron wish to be heard regarding Senate Bill 1180? Seeing none, Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Surovell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was hoping I'd get to argue with all the lawyers in the body today.
Senator, it's the floor.
So speaking to the bill, a few things. First of all, this bill is not effective until July 1 of 2022, so it's not effective for another 14, 16 months, and we're going to be out of this pandemic by then, knock on wood. Number one. Number two, yes, class actions are authorized in federal court, and they have been for years, and there are Virginia class actions that are filed in federal court, but not every class action can be filed in federal court. In order to get into federal court, you either have to have a federal question, which means you have to be suing under a federal statute, or you have to have diversity of citizenship. And it's often the case that every single person that's hurt in the case happens to be a Virginian, and the person on the other side happens to be a Virginian. For example, a landlord and their tenants. And those cases cannot be filed in federal court, period. Or if you have a Volkswagen and you live in Virginia and the headquarters is in Virginia, then you can't be part of it because there's no federal question, because there's no diversity of citizenship. And so this closes the loop on that small class of people that cannot do this under existing federal law or the laws of other states. Not a huge expansion, number one. Number two, the expansion of the Court of Appeals, from my perspective, actually makes it easier to do this, because if you're aggrieved, you have a guaranteed right to get it reviewed. Whereas right now, you're playing the lottery to see if the Supreme Court lets you be one of the 70 cases they let in out of the 1,500 to 2,000 that are appealed there every year. And when you're dealing with larger issues like this, it's important you have the right to appeal to make sure the court got it right. So from my perspective, the fact that we're doing the Court of Appeals actually militates in favor of doing things like this, makes it easier to do things like this. Number three, as I said earlier, lots of businesses like this because it makes it a lot easier for them to adjust risk. If you have something that goes wrong and go wrong in a big way, it's a lot easier to mitigate and control that risk if you can resolve things as a class instead of dealing with 50 different people or 100 different people or 250 people and their separate counsel. This makes things more efficient. I would also just note, Mr. Chairman, that to the extent people are concerned about best states to do business in, according to Forbes in their latest rankings, North Carolina is number 1, Texas is number 2, Utah is number 3, Virginia's 4, Florida's 5. Guess what? 4 out of those 5 have class action lawsuits already. So if it was such a big deal, why are they ranked ahead of us? This isn't gonna change our ranking. And the last thing I'd say, Mr. President, is that I heard some about about coupon cases and unidentified plaintiffs. Y'all might remember yesterday I made some floor amendments to the bill where I pointed out that I had incorporated into the enactment clause as a requirement that the Supreme Court, in their rules, enact standards consistent with the Federal Class Action Fairness Act. The Class Action Fairness Act was adopted in 2005, and the entire purpose of it was to create settlement standards involving coupon settlements to make sure that lawyers' fees were only based on coupons redeemed and not coupons issued. That was a big reform the feds did. That's incorporated into this bill. And with regard to unidentified plaintiffs, to settle a class action case, you have to identify the plaintiffs. You don't settle a case with unidentified plaintiffs. That's just not how they work. The company identifies who the people are, and then they get their payment as part of the settlement. Unidentified people don't get anything. So I'm not really clear where that's coming from. So, Mr. President, I know a lot of this is new to Virginia, and I know that it's not something a lot of folks that practice law in the state are comfortable with, but this is the way the rest of the country works and the way it's worked in the federal system for decades. And it's time that Virginia brought our system up to speed with everybody else. I hope we can pass the bill.
Thank the senator. Question is, shall Senate Bill 1180 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote?
Senator Norman, how do you vote?
Senator Norman votes no.
Senator Vogel, how do you vote?
Senator Vogel votes no.
Ayes 21, noes 18.
Ayes 21, noes 18. Senate Bill 1180 passes.
Senate Bill 1215.